row surrounding Rishi Sunak's wife's tax status continues to rumble on this morning and dominates the front pages of the newspapers. The Chancellor has told the Sun newspaper he believes his family are victims of a Labour smear campaign.
Well, joining us now is Labour's Emily Thornberry. Are you smearing the Chancellor?
Of course we're not. This is nonsense. The Prime Minister's ministerial code says that you need to declare details of your partner's financial circumstances in order to make sure that there's no conflict of interest. We've got the Chancellor of the Exchequer living in 10 Downing Street in obviously accommodation paid for by the taxpayer, with his wife, who has been living there for, well, they've been living together for, 8 years. They have children they're bringing up together. And she aspires to be the wife of the next Prime Minister. But she says that she's not a permanent resident in the UK. And as a result, she benefits in terms of not having to pay as much tax. And you know, this is what she's been doing. And she's married to the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who's in charge of the rules on non-doms, which is what she's claiming. You have to positively say, I am a non-dom and therefore you don't pay tax on your world income. And this is where we are. And he hasn't declared it.
Well,
he thought
I understand he did declare it to the Cabinet Office.
To the Cabinet Office, but that's not declaring it publicly. There's a register of interest that you're supposed to put it on. The ministerial code says that you should declare it publicly so that relevant questions can be asked. So, you know, we could ask, when the Treasury are deciding on maybe updating the rules on non-doms, you know, was Rishi Sunak involved in those conversations? Because he certainly shouldn't have been, because that would be a conflict of interest. He is benefiting, his family is benefiting from his wife taking this decision, which is a very unusual one. I think only 0.1% of the population even think about doing this. And we've heard all kinds of nonsense this morning, all kinds of nonsense, like, well, she's Indian and therefore she's a non-dom. It's got nothing to do with that. You can come from any country around the world and you can have whatever passport. If you're in the country legally, normally people pay their taxes on all their income, unless you're here just temporarily, and you can declare that you're only here temporarily, and then you don't need to pay taxes on all your income. You just pay tax on your British income. Now, you can see why that would apply to some people, but, you know, looking at the details of this, it is a very peculiar circumstance. But, you know, we've got a Chancellor who's asking all of us to make sacrifices. He's putting up taxes. He's expecting the country to, you know, to help bail him out of some of the mess that he's made of the economy. But he doesn't ask that of his wife.
But Emily Thornberry, your own party, the Labour Party, has benefited hugely from the wealth of non-doms, who you claim are 0.01% of people in the UK. Luxury Mittal in 2010 donated £5 million to Labour. He's domiciled abroad for tax purposes. Lord Noon, nicknamed the Curry King, Bombay-born, donated nearly £1 million to Labour, but gave up his non-dom status when he joined the House of Lords. And Sir Ronald Cohen, the Egyptian-born businessman, gave £2.5 million in donations to Labour. Cohen was appointed chair of the Social Investment Task Force. So you might not even be here if it wasn't for their millions. It's kept your party going.
What's the conflict of interest? What's the conflict of interest?
Isn't the conflict that you are benefiting from people who aren't paying their entire tax in the UK? It's the same situation that Rishi Sunak finds himself. He's in a relationship with somebody who's accused of not paying her entire tax in the UK. That's the same situation, isn't it?
It's his wife. And it's his wife, and it's for that reason, it's his partner. That's why the ministerial code... Listen, this is something, if you look at the ministerial code, it's got the Prime Minister on the front who, you know, signs it off as being, yes, I expect my ministers to keep to this.
But it's OK for a party to take donation money from non-domiciles. It's OK for that.
It's all declared. It's all declared, and it's put on the public record. This was not even put on the public record. This was not even declared in the way that it should have been.
So had Mr Sunak declared this publicly years ago, this wouldn't be a story today. It'd be absolutely fine.
I just don't understand why Rishi Sunak thought that he could keep it quiet. I just don't understand it. You know,
well, let's give him the benefit of the doubt then. Let's say that he declared it to the Cabinet Office, and I imagine at that point they said, "You're fine. You've done the right thing. you don't need to do any more.
Well, I would hope that the Cabinet Office didn't say that, Kate.
Well,
I'd hope the Cabinet Office would actually understand what the rules were a bit better.
Let's go with the generous. Right. And then we find that that it is his wife's family and it's her percentage in the family business based in India. You know, we all have personal circumstances, don't they? Maybe he just thought, well, I've done my bit. I've made it clear. What should happen now, though? Because now, to a lot of people, and sometimes I think some people that got to our programme aren't even quite sure why they don't feel like it. They're not even as technical as you and talking about conflict of interest. They just feel uncomfortable that the person who has brought in, under his time, the highest taxes since the 40s, is married to somebody that, for purposes of benefit of tax, it would appear, isn't paying their full tax, so and is declaring themselves as Indian and an Indian citizen. So what should be done now? Does he have to divorce his wife? Does he have to force her to pay the tax? Does he have to resign? Should there be an investigation? What are we saying other than this doesn't feel right?
I think you're right, Kate. I think that most people listening to this and listening to the details of exactly how it is that she's not paying full tax would think this doesn't seem to be fair. And I can quite understand that. And very often when you see the circumstances of someone who doesn't pay their full taxes because they say they're non-dom, they can think it isn't fair. And an awful lot of working people feel that the biggest burden of tax seems to always fall on them. And they're the ones who don't exactly have a huge amount of money, but they're always expected to be paying more and more tax. I get that. And actually, you know, Rachel, our Shadow Chancellor, is way out ahead on this. And she announced at Labour Party conference last year that we're going to look again, as the Labour Party, at all of these loopholes and look at it in terms of what's fair and what's not fair. And obviously this will be one of the things that we'll be looking at.
What should Rishi Sunak do now? I mean, you know, what would you tell him to do? What are you calling for him to do? You clearly don't think it's right.
I think it's it's a matter for him and his wife what they do. I'm not saying that it isn't legal. I'm saying that it's not fair. But it's for them and their conscience what it is that they do. And she had to make a positive choice to decide to be a non-dom. It isn't something which you just get because you're an Indian citizen, which is kind of what they seem to be implying. There are many people who are Indian citizens in this country who don't claim non-dom status and pay all their taxes on all their income to the British Exchequer. And many people watching this would think, well, that's probably the right thing to do.
Yeah. Look, worth pointing out, she does pay tax on her UK income, and we need to point that out. Let's move on, because I know you want to talk about a couple of other things. Home ownership, it seems to be a bit of a concern for the Labour Party. Just tell us what your concern at the moment is about home ownership in the UK.
Well, I think that there is a terrible crisis when it comes to housing in the United Kingdom. When you just look at the younger generation in particular and how it seems to be impossible for a younger generation to be able to buy their own homes, to be able to afford to buy their own homes, and to be able to get on with their lives. And many of them, I think, are subject to private landlords who are not particularly well regulated, and they feel that they're being exploited. It's a question of intergenerational fairness, in my view, that an older generation, we're kind of all right, but our children, what is going to happen to them? Will they ever be able to find themselves feeling sufficiently secure to be able to get on with their lives, be able to have families, be able to get together, that sort of thing. And so we just need to look again at housing and look at what's fair and what's not fair. And for the fact that there seems to be a certain amount of, one generation seems to have permanent ownership of housing, but a younger generation find it so hard to get onto the ladder.
What about people who own two homes? I mean, there's often sort of, allegations made against people who've got second homes, maybe in big cities like London, down on the south coast, and they hardly use them. They remain empty. That's a huge issue, isn't it?
I think there's two things. I think, first of all, there is that we're not saying that there isn't room for the private rented sector, but what we're saying is that there needs to be it needs to be fair, and there needs to be better regulation of the private rented sector than there is at the moment, because we think that the landlords have too much power and the tenants don't have enough. It's always a question of balance. You need to make sure that you give tenants some rights and you don't freeze out people and scare people off from renting out, because the private rented sector is an important part of our housing. But then for people who have second homes, the question really is, do they pay a proper contribution? And we think that the amount of local taxes that people with second homes pay is not sufficient. That's what the sort of things that we need to be looking at. Because yes, you're right. I mean, we have a population which is about the same size as France, for example, but we have half the land space. I mean, we are a highly populated area, and we do have this housing crisis. And everybody just sort of shrugs their shoulders and says this is just too hard to deal with. Well, it can't be. And it is really important that we show proper leadership on this issue.
So just to clarify, you're saying if you've got a second home, you should be paying what, higher council tax?
Well, I think that's the only fair way of proceeding myself.
Do you have any second homes yourself?
I have I bought my mum a flat when she was in a council house, and the council house we were brought up in, and I helped to buy my mum a flat, and we still own that, me and my brothers. My mother died, and we rent that out.
Right. Listen, Emily Thornberry, thank you very much for joining us this morning on Good Morning Britain.
It's a pleasure.